Betrayal in the mansion. The Calloway estate stood like a monument to old Southern money. Its white stone pillars rose high into the pale sky, framed by manicured hedges and marble steps that glistened from the morning rain. To the outside world it was perfection. Wealth, elegance, and legacy bound into one vast mansion. But within its halls, cracks had begun to show, cracks invisible to most except to those forced to live at the margins of that polished life. Maya Williams had been one of those people. At only 29, she had carried more responsibility than many twice her age. Her quiet dignity, her unyielding calm in the face of cruelty, made her beloved by some and despised by others. She had worked at the Calloway estate for just over a year, long enough to know that appearances often mattered more than truth. Long enough to see both kindness and venom behind those marble walls. It was a quiet afternoon when everything changed. The tension builds, Mrs. Clara Calloway, the matriarch, sat in her wingback chair by the window. At 78, her body was frail, but her eyes, blue as the summer sky, still carried wisdom and warmth. She had grown fond of Maya, often asking her to sit and share tea, to listen to stories of Clara's late husband and the family empire he had built. For Maya, those quiet moments were a refuge. For Regina Ward, however, they were a threat. Regina was Ethan Calloway's fiancée, a woman of sharp cheekbones, designer gowns, and a heart seemingly carved from glass. She had beauty, money of her own, and an ambition that stretched beyond the horizon. To her, Maya was not just a servant. She was an inconvenience, a reminder that kindness often outshone cruelty. And Regina hated being outshone. That afternoon, Clara had grown dizzy. Maya crouched beside her, steadying her trembling hands, whispering reassurance. "You're all right, Mrs. Calloway, just breathe slowly. I've got you." Maya's arms cradled the older woman, her uniform pressed against Clara's fragile frame. Then the sound came, a voice sharp enough to split the air. "You think you can lay your filthy hands on his mother, you useless maid?" Regina's voice tore through the room like a dagger. Violence in the parlor. Maya froze, her heart pounding. She tightened her arms protectively around Clara, shielding her as Regina strode across the polished floor. Her stiletto heels clicked like gunshots, each step laced with fury. Clara whimpered, her lips trembling. "Please, don't." But Regina didn't hear or didn't care. With sudden violence, she lashed out, her heel striking Maya's hip. The pain shot through Maya's body, but she didn't let go. "Get your hands off her, you meddling piece of trash," Regina hissed, her face twisted with contempt. "This is not your business. Do you hear me? Not your business." "Please stop," Maya pleaded, her voice cracking. "She's in pain. Please don't hurt her anymore. She's your fiancé's mother. Please think of her heart." But Regina laughed, a sound like nails on glass. "Look at you, pretending to be some kind of hero. You're nothing but a servant. Stay in your place." In a fit of rage, she grabbed a silver tray from the sideboard and hurled it across the room. The tray clanged against the far wall, missing Maya's head by inches. Maya flinched, but her arms held steady around Clara. "Mrs. Calloway," she whispered urgently. "I've got you. Breathe, please breathe." Clara clutched Maya's sleeve weakly, eyes wide with fear, but no words came out. "Let her go." Regina shrieked, her voice echoing off the marble. "You're hurting her, Ethan. Ethan, help." The billionaire appears from the archway, a deep voice boomed, low and controlled. "What the hell is going on here?" Ethan Calloway stood framed by the doorway, tall and commanding in a navy suit. At 35, he was the heir to the Calloway fortune, with storm-gray eyes that carried both charm and severity. But in that moment, his eyes widened at the sight before him. His frail mother hunched over, his fiancée trembling theatrically, and his maid crouched low, arms wrapped around Clara. Regina spun toward him, her face pale but her eyes glittering with calculation. "Ethan, thank God. I tried to stop her, but she shoved your mother." "I couldn't get her off. That's not true." Maya's voice broke as she looked up, eyes glistening with tears. "I was trying to protect her. She was about to—" "Shut up," Regina screamed, pointing a manicured finger. "You think you can waltz in here and play savior? You think anyone's going to believe you? She's dangerous, Ethan. Look at her. Look at my arm." She clutched her elbow, though no mark was visible. Her performance was flawless, every gesture rehearsed, every tear precisely placed. Ethan's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, eyes fixed on Maya. "Get away from my mother." Maya's heart plummeted. "Sir, please listen to me." I said get away." Ethan barked, his voice sharp as steel. Regina gasped, her tone dripping relief. Thank you, Ethan. Finally. She was scaring me to death. Maya gently shifted Clara against the armrest of the chaise, her hands trembling. Mrs. Calloway needs a doctor. Please, Ethan, don't. I trusted you, Ethan muttered, more to himself than anyone. His mother's pale hand reached toward Maya, trembling, trying to speak, but Ethan didn't notice. You're fired, he said flatly. Pack your things and leave. Shattered trust, Maya's lips parted, a protest trembling on her tongue, but she swallowed it. She had seen this before. When truth collided with power, power always spoke louder. Slowly she rose, straightening her uniform. I was only trying to help, she whispered. Get out before I call the police. Regina cut in, her voice low and venomous. You've done enough. Maya glanced once more at Clara's stricken face, then at Ethan's cold eyes. Her own voice came soft, almost pleading. Please, don't let her be alone with her again. Silence. No one answered. Maya turned, her heart heavy, and walked out, past Regina's satisfied smirk, past the gleaming marble foyer where shards of porcelain glittered like broken promises. Outside, rain began to fall. Cool, steady? Her old Ford Escort waited at the end of the drive. Its paint faded, its engine tired. She gripped her duffel bag tighter and kept walking, her back straight even as her chest ached. Aftermath inside, Ethan knelt beside his mother, helping her to a chair. Are you all right? His voice softened, though his eyes were troubled. Clara looked past him toward the door where Maya had gone, her lips trembling with words she couldn't speak. Her eyes filled with despair, silently begging him to see the truth. Regina hovered nearby, her tone perfectly pitched. She's unstable, Ethan. I told you something wasn't right. Thank God you came when you did. Ethan said nothing. He stared at the floor, at the shattered porcelain, at the image of his mother clutched in Maya's arms. Something inside him twisted, a story that didn't make sense, a truth just out of reach. But for now, he let the lie stand, and outside in the rain, the only person who had truly protected his mother was driving away, carrying the weight of a crime she hadn't committed. Maya alone. The rain hadn't stopped since Maya left the estate. It blurred the road ahead, the wipers of her old Ford struggling to keep up. The dull ache in her hip pulsed with every movement. Her mind echoed with Regina's words. Useless maid. She had heard insults before, but this cut deeper. Not because of what was said, but because Ethan had believed it. At a gas station on the edge of Charleston, she stopped. Under the buzz of a neon sign, she bought burnt coffee with the last crumpled bill in her pocket. Back in the car, she stared into the mirror. Her reflection was tired, her eyes red but not broken. You did what was right, she whispered to herself, even if no one saw it. Her hands trembled as lightning split the sky. She gripped the wheel tighter, forcing the Ford back onto the road. She drove until she found a small roadside inn, Whisper Pines Lodge, a place she remembered from her nursing days. The woman at the desk squinted at her. 1 night or more? 1 night, Maya murmured. Inside the shabby room, Maya sat on the bed, pulling out the small notebook she had kept since her mother's funeral. She wrote slowly, each word a wound and a balm. I lost another job today. Not because of what I did, but because of what I am. Still, I would do it again, because doing nothing would have meant letting an old woman suffer. And I couldn't do that. She closed the notebook and held the silver hairpin Clara had given her for luck. Its edges were cold against her skin. She whispered a prayer into the silence, hoping Clara was safe. In the mansion, meanwhile, Ethan stood outside his mother's room, hands deep in his pockets, watching her sleep. The doctor had assured him her injuries were minor. She just needs rest, the doctor had said. But Ethan's mind replayed the scene. His mother's frail body, Maya's trembling arms, Regina's desperate tears, and the fragments of porcelain on the floor. Behind him, Regina's voice floated through the room. You see why I didn't want that woman here, Ethan? She was unstable. The way she clung to your mother, it wasn't normal. Ethan frowned. She's been nothing but kind to my mother. What could possibly make her snap like that? Regina's mask slipped just for a moment, her eyes hardening. People like her. They hold grudges. Maybe she thought your mother didn't respect her. You know how they get when they feel small? Ethan's jaw tightened. People like her? Regina blinked, the mask sliding back into place. You know what I mean, but Ethan wasn't sure he did. A world outside the gates. The rain had finally eased into a slow drizzle by the time Maya awoke the next morning at Whisper Pines Lodge. The motel room smelled faintly of old carpet, damp wood, and the faintest trace of cigarette smoke that no amount of industrial cleaner could erase. She sat upright on the bed, staring at the faded wallpaper where roses had once been bright but had dulled over the years. Much like her own spirit seemed dulled after the long night of restlessness. Yet unlike the roses, Maya had a will that could not be entirely washed out by time or circumstance. Her body ached from the blow Regina had dealt her, but the ache inside her chest ran deeper, the ache of betrayal, of truth crushed beneath power, of being cast aside like she was invisible. She dressed in silence, pulling her one spare outfit from the duffel bag she always kept ready. It wasn't that she had expected this specific dismissal, but life had taught her to never unpack her hopes too deeply. She had moved from job to job since her early 20s. Restaurants, caregiving, housekeeping, hospital shifts, each time holding on with determination until prejudice, politics, or sheer misfortune had forced her out. Her mother had always told her, do right, no matter what it costs you, because at the end of the day, your soul will be the only thing you take with you. That advice echoed in her mind now, even though her soul felt heavy. Stepping outside, the cool morning air greeted her, crisp with the scent of wet pine. She pulled her jacket tight and walked to her old Ford Escort. The paint was chipped, the bumper dented from years of wear, but it was hers. One of the few things in her life she had managed to keep. She turned the key, listening to the engine sputter reluctantly to life. Every time it started, she whispered a small thank you, because she knew that in a world so ready to strip her of everything, even an old car could mean freedom. Memories of a different dream as she drove toward the city. Her mind wandered back to a different time, before the Calloway estate, before Regina's cruelty, before she had become a maid to survive. Maya had once been a nursing student. She had loved medicine, not the sterile parts of it, but the human side. The way one gentle hand could soothe a frightened patient, the way a voice could guide someone back from panic to peace. Her professors had praised her instincts, her calm under pressure, her hunger to learn. But when her mother had fallen ill, Maya's education had been cut short, bills piled high, tuition unpaid, and suddenly the girl who had dreamed of saving lives was working double shifts at a diner and scrubbing houses on the weekends. Her mother's cancer had eaten through more than her body. It had devoured their savings, their security, their stability, and when her mother finally passed, Maya had been left alone with debts, grief, and the quiet ache of an abandoned dream. Working at the Calloway estate had been, in some ways, a blessing. Clara Calloway had reminded her of her mother, gentle, thoughtful, and appreciative in ways that wealth often erased. Clara had thanked her for small kindnesses, had insisted on giving her small gifts like the silver hairpin now tucked in Maya's pocket. It was Clara's smile that had made the job bearable, even as Regina had found endless ways to belittle her. Losing Clara felt, in some strange way, like losing her mother all over again. Regina's mask tightens across town. Regina Ward stood before a gilded mirror in the Calloway mansion, draped in silk and confidence. She practiced her expressions, the tremble of a lip, the well-timed tear, the perfect quiver of fear. She was a master of performance, and she knew it. Ethan's eyes had flickered with doubt last night, but Regina had seen enough to know she still controlled the narrative. The maid was gone, the threat neutralized. Clara, of course, was a different matter. The old woman's eyes had told a story Regina wished she hadn't seen. Fear, mistrust, a silent cry toward that pathetic maid. Regina clenched her fists as she paced the room. Clara was an obstacle she hadn't planned on. Her marriage to Ethan was supposed to be seamless. The merging of two powerful names, the opening of doors even her considerable wealth had not yet unlocked. She couldn't allow a frail old woman or a meddling servant to unravel her future, so she leaned harder into her role. Over breakfast, she poured Ethan's coffee, her voice soft, her concern painted carefully across every word.
Ethan, I don't know how you can still doubt me after what you saw.
That woman had your mother in a grip. She's dangerous, unpredictable. We were lucky she didn't do more harm. Ethan frowned but said little, his mind drifting elsewhere. Regina took it as victory, smiling inwardly. She would not lose. Ethan's quiet doubt yet. Ethan Calloway was not as blind as Regina hoped. That night had replayed in his mind again and again, His mother's trembling frame, Maya's desperate pleas, Regina's shrill accusations, it all seemed like pieces that didn't fit. Ethan had grown up in a world where appearances ruled, where wealth often dictated truth. But he had also inherited a sliver of his father's old instinct, to question, to probe, to doubt. He had noticed small things before, how Maya had always been gentle with his mother, how Clara had smiled brighter in her presence. Clara was a woman of few words, but her body language had been clear. She had trusted Maya. And when Clara had reached her hand toward the maid, Ethan had seen it. Why had he ignored it? Why had he listened to Regina's shrill voice instead of his own instincts? Now he paced the study, his fingers tracing the edge of an old leather chair. He told himself he had done the right thing, that Regina's account was logical. Yet the pit in his stomach grew heavier with each passing hour. Something wasn't right, and he knew it. Clara's silent plea in her room, Clara Calloway rested under heavy blankets, her body weak, but her mind alive with regret. She had tried to speak, to tell Ethan the truth, but her voice had failed her. Regina hovered too closely, always intercepting, always whispering lies. Clara hated feeling powerless. She had lived long enough to see empires built and empires fall, and she recognized cruelty when she saw it. Regina's mask fooled many, but not her. Her only comfort was the silver hairpin she had given Maya. She prayed Maya still had it, that somehow it gave her strength. Clara wished she could call her back, wished she could tell her son the truth, but her body betrayed her and all she could do was wait. Her heart aching with guilt, Maya finds purpose again. Meanwhile, Maya pulled her car into the lot of the Charleston Community Health Clinic, a modest brick building tucked between a laundromat and an auto repair shop. She had volunteered there once during her nursing studies and had never forgotten the warmth of the place. She walked inside, greeted by the smell of antiseptic and the sound of children laughing in the waiting room. The head nurse, Mrs. Delgado, recognized her immediately. "Maya, my goodness, it's been years. What brings you here?" Maya hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I need work, any work. I'll mop floors, stock supplies, anything you need." Mrs. Delgado studied her, then nodded. "We're short on hands. Come back tomorrow. We'll find you something." It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't the nursing career Maya had once dreamed of. But as she walked out of the clinic, a small spark of hope stirred in her chest. She would not be broken. She would find a way forward with or without the Calloways. Foreshadow of collision. But fate has a way of drawing broken paths back together. Ethan's doubts would only grow. Clara's voice would one day break through, and Maya's quiet resilience, unnoticed for so long, would soon become the key to unmasking Regina's cruelty. For now, though, the world remained divided, a billionaire trapped by appearances, a mother silenced by weakness, a fiancé weaving lies, and a maid walking the road alone, her heart heavy, but her spirit unyielding. And though none of them knew it yet, the truth was already stirring, waiting for the moment to tear through the lies like lightning through a storm. The secret unfolds. The days following Maya's dismissal unfolded with a heavy stillness, as though the rain that had once lashed against the mansion's windows had seeped into the lives within it, leaving everything damp and unsettled. Ethan Calloway moved through the halls of his father's estate with the air of a man consumed by his own doubts. He attended meetings, signed papers, discussed investments with board members, and gave curt instructions to staff. But his mind never strayed far from that image burned into his memory. His mother in the maid's arms, her lips trembling with words she could not form, while Regina screamed accusations in the background. He tried to convince himself he had done the right thing, that he had protected his mother by removing a threat. But the unease gnawed at him, whispering in the quiet hours of the night, when even the chandeliers seemed to flicker uneasily under his gaze. For Clara Calloway, the mansion that had once been her sanctuary now felt like a prison gilded in marble. Regina rarely left her side, always hovering under the guise of attentiveness, arranging her meals, pouring her tea, insisting on helping. Her walk when in truth her grip was more bruising than supportive. Clara endured it in silence, but her heart ached for the absence of Maya's steady hands, her calm voice, her gentle reassurances. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the way Maya had shielded her from Regina's wrath, absorbing the blows meant for her. Clara longed to tell Ethan, to break the web of lies that had been spun around him. But whenever she opened her mouth to speak, Regina was there, filling the silence with her carefully constructed stories. Maya, meanwhile, tried to stitch her life back together with the few scraps she had left. At the Charleston Community Health Clinic, she began her first day mopping floors and stocking supply cabinets, simple tasks that brought her into the orbit of lives far more fragile than her own. She watched young mothers cradle feverish infants, elderly men shuffle in with weary limbs, and tired nurses push themselves through endless shifts. And though her job was humble, she found meaning in every task. She cleaned each room as though it were sacred, folded bandages with the precision of a surgeon, and when no one was looking, she sometimes sat beside a patient just to hold a hand or offer a word of comfort. She had no title, no recognition, yet her presence made a difference in ways that no resume could capture. It was during one of those afternoons while restocking bandages in the small supply closet that she discovered a letter slipped beneath the door. The handwriting was trembling but unmistakably familiar. She unfolded the paper with shaking fingers, and as her eyes traced the lines, her heart thudded painfully in her chest. My dearest Maya, I do not have long to write this. I am watched, but I need you to know you are not forgotten. I know what happened. I know you protected me. Do not lose heart. The truth will find its way. Please, if you can, forgive my son. He is blind now, but he will see one day. Clara Calloway. Maya pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. Clara had reached out despite the risks, her frail hand pushing against Regina's watchful control to send a message of gratitude and hope. That one piece of paper restored a strength Maya hadn't realized she had lost. She folded it carefully, tucking it into her notebook beside the other truths she recorded nightly. It was not just ink on paper. It was proof that kindness was not forgotten, that truth still had an ally inside the mansion. Back at the Calloway estate, however, Regina's cruelty deepened behind closed doors. With Maya gone, Clara had no shield. Regina's words sharpened, her patience thinned, and when servants were not watching, her hand grew heavy. She disguised her malice in subtle ways, an accidental shove into a chair, a grip too tight on a frail wrist, a withheld dose of medicine disguised as forgetfulness. Clara bore it with quiet endurance, her eyes speaking the pain her lips could not. Ethan noticed his mother's growing frailty but attributed it to age, never imagining that the woman he was preparing to marry was hastening the decline. Regina, for her part, began to notice Ethan's unease. He asked small questions, harmless at first, about Maya's time in the house, about his mother's comfort. Each time, Regina brushed them aside with the ease of a seasoned actress. Yet his eyes lingered too long on her, searching, questioning, and she knew she could not allow doubt to fester. She needed to cement her hold before the cracks widened. One evening, as Ethan stood in the library reviewing documents, Regina swept in, her silk gown trailing like a shadow. She set a glass of whiskey before him and perched on the arm of his chair. Ethan, I worry about you. You've been distant since that night, I can feel it. Are you doubting me? Her voice quivered, just enough to sound vulnerable. Ethan exhaled slowly, staring into the amber liquid in his glass. I don't know what to think. My mother trusts very few people, and yet she seemed to trust that woman. She reached for her, Regina. That doesn't look like fear to me. Regina's eyes flickered with irritation, but she masked it with a practiced smile. Darling, people like her, they know how to manipulate. She probably convinced your mother she cared when really she was just after pity. You can't let sentiment cloud your judgment. You're a Calloway. You know better. Her words slithered into his mind, but they did not silence his doubt. The image of Maya's tear-filled eyes as she whispered, "Please don't let her be alone with her again," haunted him. He had dismissed it, but now it echoed like a warning he could not shake. While Regina tightened her grip on Ethan, Maya's world at the clinic was expanding. She had been given more responsibility, allowed to assist with patients, to sit in on consultations, to hand supplies during procedures. The old fire within her, the dream of nursing, of healing, was being rekindled. Each day she returned to her small motel room exhausted, yet fulfilled in a way she hadn't felt in years. The letter from Clara sat on her nightstand, a reminder that even in the darkest places truth could shine through. The collision course between these worlds was inevitable. Maya, the maid dismissed in disgrace, was slowly becoming a force of quiet strength in the community. Ethan, the billionaire torn between appearances and conscience, was inching closer to questioning the foundation of his choices. Clara, the frail matriarch silenced by age and illness, was waiting for her chance to be heard. And Regina, ruthless and calculating, was tightening her mask while cracks began to show beneath its polished surface. Part 3 of their story was no longer about dismissal or silence. It was about secrets stirring in the shadows, truths refusing to stay buried, and the fragile threads of fate pulling each of them toward a confrontation that none could escape. A chance encounter. The weeks slipped by, each one heavy with unspoken truths, until fate decided to stitch the torn pieces of these lives back together in a way none of them could have predicted. Maya had settled into her quiet routine at the Charleston Community Health Clinic, moving through the small hallways with the unhurried grace of someone who found meaning in the simplest acts. She wasn't a nurse in title, but her instincts had not dulled with time. When a frightened child clung to her mother's skirt, it was Maya who knelt low, her voice soft and steady, coaxing the child into calmness. When an elderly man grumbled about his aching bones, it was Maya who listened with genuine patience, her eyes conveying respect rather than dismissal. Even the overworked doctors had begun to notice the way patients relaxed in her presence, how she seemed to restore something that medicine alone could not provide. For Maya, the clinic was both sanctuary and test. Every day she walked into that brick building, she was reminded of what she had lost and what she still yearned for. The unfinished dream of becoming a nurse, of stepping fully into the calling that had been ripped away by circumstance. Yet she was also reminded of resilience. Each person who came through those doors carried a story of survival, of scraping by despite the odds. Their strength mirrored her own, and she drew power from it. The pain of being cast out of the Calloway estate had not vanished, but in the company of those who needed her, it became bearable. Across the city, Ethan Calloway's life was no less turbulent, though his turbulence wore a far more polished mask. Business meetings, charity galas, and social gatherings filled his calendar, each one another opportunity for Regina to showcase their engagement, to present themselves as the golden couple society expected. But behind Ethan's storm-gray eyes, doubt gnawed steadily. He would glance at Regina during dinner, watching the way she smiled too brightly, the way her laugh came at odd moments, the way her hand lingered possessively on his arm as if claiming him before a crowd. And always in the back of his mind the memory of Maya intruded, the raw honesty in her tears, the desperate plea for him not to leave his mother alone, the quiet dignity with which she had walked out under the rain. It was during one such evening, at a fundraising gala for local healthcare initiatives, that the invisible threads of fate began to weave the estranged lives together again. The ballroom glowed with crystal chandeliers, their light shimmering across gowns and tuxedos, the air filled with polite laughter and the clink of champagne glasses. Ethan stood near the edge of the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with donors while Regina worked the room with effortless charm, her red silk dress commanding attention like fire in motion. He should have been proud, perhaps even content, yet his heart remained restless. And then, across the crowded room, his gaze caught on a familiar figure. Maya. She was not dressed in finery, not adorned in jewels, yet she stood with a quiet presence that eclipsed the glittering crowd. She wore a modest navy dress, borrowed no doubt. Her hair pulled back simply, her hands folded before her. She had not come as a guest, but as part of the clinic staff invited to represent their work. Standing at a small booth set up along the side of the ballroom, she spoke with a group of attendees, her voice calm, her gestures earnest, describing the needs of the underserved patients who came through the clinic's doors. Her sincerity radiated more brightly than any crystal chandelier. Ethan froze, the glass in his hand forgotten. A rush of emotions collided in him. Shame for the way he had dismissed her, confusion at seeing her again, admiration for the strength she carried even in simplicity. He wanted to move toward her, to speak, but his feet felt heavy, bound by guilt. Regina noticed his distraction. Her eyes, sharp as blades even behind the mask of her smile, followed his line of sight. When she saw Maya, her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, though to anyone else it looked like nothing more than a fleeting expression. But inside fury coiled. The maid was supposed to be gone, erased, forgotten, and yet here she stood, unbowed, radiating the very kind of dignity Regina could never fabricate. Maya, for her part, felt the weight of Ethan's stare before she saw him. When her eyes finally lifted and met his across the room, her heart gave a painful jolt. She had not expected to see him here. Not in this world of wealth and pretense where she no longer belonged. For a moment her breath caught, but she quickly steadied herself, returning her attention to the donors before her. She would not let his presence unravel her. She had survived too much to falter now. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned and the music softened, Ethan finally gathered the resolve to approach her. His footsteps were hesitant, his voice low when he spoke. "Maya." She turned slowly, her eyes steady, though a storm of memories flickered within them. "Mr. Calloway." The formality cut him like a blade. He searched her face for anger, for bitterness, but found instead a composed strength that unsettled him even more. "I didn't know you worked here," he said, almost awkwardly. "I don't," she replied. "Not formally. I help where I can." Her tone was calm, but there was a distance in her words, a wall built to protect herself from the man who had once cast her into the rain without a second thought. Ethan swallowed, his voice rough. "About what happened?" Maya lifted her chin slightly, her voice steady. "You don't need to explain, sir. You believed what you wanted to believe. That's all there is to it." Her words stung because they were true. He had believed Regina without question, had silenced Maya's pleas without a second thought. Now, standing before her, he realized how deeply that decision had wounded not just her but his own conscience. Before he could respond, Regina appeared at his side, her smile sharp and poisonous. "Darling, there you are. I've been looking everywhere." She turned her gaze on Maya, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Oh, what a surprise. I didn't expect to see you here. Still volunteering, I see." Maya met her gaze calmly, refusing to flinch. "Yes, still helping where I can." The exchange was brief, but beneath the polished words a silent war crackled in the air. Regina's eyes glittered with veiled threat, while Maya's calm presence stood in quiet defiance. Ethan, caught between them, felt the tension coil around him like a noose. For the first time he saw clearly how different the two women were. One clothed in pretense, the other in truth. The evening ended without further confrontation, but the encounter left ripples that would not fade. Ethan could no longer dismiss his doubts. Clara's frailty, Regina's harshness, Maya's dignity, they formed a pattern he could no longer ignore. And as for Maya, walking out of the ballroom into the cool night air, she carried herself with quiet strength, but her heart pounded. She had faced them both and stood her ground. The fight was not over. She could feel it in her bones. But for the first time since leaving the estate, she sensed that fate was drawing her back into the story she thought she had left behind. Truth revealed. The night after the gala settled heavily over the Calloway estate, its marble halls silent but for the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the drawing room. The chandeliers glowed dimly, their light reflecting off polished floors that had once welcomed dignitaries, statesmen, and tycoons. But for Clara Calloway, none of that grandeur mattered anymore. Her body had grown weaker with each passing week, her voice more frail, her steps less steady. The absence of Maya's gentle care weighed upon her more than anyone realized. Where once she had been helped with compassion, she was now handled with cold calculation, Regina's hands guiding her not with love but with control, every action laced with the intent to dominate. That evening, as Regina stood in her satin robe pouring herself a final glass of wine, Clara felt her chest tighten with a force that stole her breath. Pain radiated from her heart into her arms, and the room began to tilt dangerously. She tried to call for help, but her voice came out as nothing more than a whisper. She clutched the edge of her chair, her face paling, her frail frame trembling under the weight of the attack. Regina turned, startled for only a moment, and then narrowed her eyes, setting the glass down with deliberate slowness. "Oh, not now," Regina muttered under her breath, as if Clara's pain were an inconvenience rather than an emergency. She knelt beside the old woman, but her grip was rough, her words sharp. "Come on. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Breathe, Clara, you'll be fine. Stop making a scene." But Clara's lips trembled, her eyes desperate. She knew she was not fine, and she knew in her heart that Regina was not the savior she needed. In that moment, regret clawed through her. Regret that she had not fought harder to keep Maya, regret that she had not spoken loudly enough when truth could have been heard. Now her body betrayed her, collapsing under the weight of both age and cruelty. Upstairs, Ethan returned from the study, his tie loosened, his mind restless. He was halfway up the corridor when he heard the muffled thud followed by a strained cry. He rushed toward the sound, his heart hammering. The sight that greeted him chilled his blood. His mother slumped in her chair, her chest heaving, her hand weakly clutching her side while Regina hovered with an expression caught somewhere between irritation and feigned concern. "Mother!" Ethan's voice thundered through the room as he rushed forward. He knelt by her side, panic lacing his features. "What happened? What did you do?" Regina bristled. "I didn't do anything. She collapsed. I was about to call someone." Ethan's storm-gray eyes flashed. He saw the wine glass still half full on the table, saw the lack of urgency in Regina's posture, saw the terror in his mother's eyes. For the first time, he let himself doubt completely. "You should have called already," he growled, his voice sharp. "Get me my phone, now." Regina hesitated, her mouth parting to protest, but Ethan's glare silenced her. He scooped his mother into his arms with surprising gentleness, his voice softening as he whispered, "Hold on, Mother. I've got you." For a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms and deals, the helplessness in that moment was almost unbearable. Within minutes, Ethan's black sedan cut through the night toward Charleston General Hospital. Clara lay weak in the back seat, Ethan's hand gripping hers tightly as he drove with one hand. Regina sat beside him, her expression a mask of worry, though her eyes flickered with unease at every turn. She had not expected events to spiral so quickly, and she feared what truths might emerge in the sterile lights of a hospital. A reunion in the hospital at the clinic earlier that same evening. Maya had been asked to assist with night coverage at the general hospital. A flu outbreak had stretched the staff thin, and volunteers were being pulled from every corner. When she arrived in her modest scrubs, she moved quickly through the triage area, checking on patients, fetching supplies, offering comfort where she could. Though not officially a nurse, her calm efficiency impressed even the seasoned staff. She was exactly where she had always belonged, amidst the weary and the wounded, her hands and heart both at work. She was replenishing gauze in an exam room when the automatic doors at the emergency entrance slid open, and a voice called out sharply, "I need help here." She turned instinctively, her eyes widening. Ethan Calloway stood in the doorway, his suit jacket tossed aside, his tie loose, his mother limp in his arms. Behind him, Regina trailed, her heels clicking frantically against the tile floor. For a moment, Maya's breath caught in her chest. Fate had brought them colliding together once more. Not in a ballroom, but in a place of truth, where pretense was stripped away. The attending nurse rushed forward with a gurney, but it was Maya who stepped in, her training from long ago instinctively taking over. "Set her here, quickly." "Ma'am, can you hear me?" "Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." Clara's weak fingers curled faintly against Maya's palm. Relief and sorrow surged through Maya at once. She leaned closer, her voice a soft whisper. "I've got you, Mrs. Calloway, you're not alone." Ethan's head snapped up at the sound of her voice. Shock rippled through him as recognition struck. Maya, the woman he had fired, the one he had dismissed in anger, now standing before him in scrubs, her hands steady, her eyes filled with compassion as she tended to the mother he adored. For a moment he could not speak. Guilt hit him like a tidal wave. Regina, however, reacted with barely concealed fury. "What is she doing here?" she hissed, stepping closer. "She doesn't belong," but Ethan cut her off, his voice firm. "Enough, Regina. She's helping." The words hung heavy in the air, marking the first time he had openly pushed back against Regina. She faltered, her eyes narrowing, but she swallowed her protest. The staff moved Clara swiftly into a treatment room, with Maya at their side. Though technically only assisting, she moved with the precision of someone who had once studied to heal. She guided oxygen tubes, steadied trembling hands, whispered reassurances that no one else thought to offer. Ethan watched from the doorway, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear for his mother and awe at Maya's quiet strength. This was not the desperate servant he had once misjudged. This was a woman of courage, grace, and skill, standing firm in the storm. In that sterile hospital light, the truth began to pierce the fog of lies Regina had wrapped around him. The turning of the tide hours later, after the immediate crisis had passed and Clara rested under careful observation, Ethan stepped into the waiting area where Maya sat quietly, exhaustion lining her features. He approached slowly as though unsure of his right to stand before her. "Maya," he said at last, his voice low. She looked up, her eyes steady, though her shoulders sagged with fatigue. "Mr. Calloway." The formality again stung him, but he did not retreat. He sat beside her, his hands clasped together. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Finally, he spoke, his tone raw with honesty. "I was wrong. That night, I should have listened to you. I should have seen what was in front of me." Maya's gaze softened slightly, though she did not let him off easily. "You saw what you wanted to see. Power has a way of silencing truth. I've lived with that my whole life." He nodded, his jaw tightening with guilt. "I let her deceive me. But tonight, watching you with my mother, Maya, you saved her. And I—" He stopped, his voice faltering because apologies felt too small for the weight of what he owed her. Maya shook her head gently. "It wasn't about saving her for you. It was about saving her because she deserved care. That's all I ever wanted, to do what was right no matter who believed me." Ethan's throat tightened. For a man used to commanding rooms, he found himself humbled, struggling for words. "My mother reached for you that night. I see it now. She trusted you, not Regina, and I failed her by not trusting her choice." The confession hung heavy between them, a crack in the wall that had divided them. Maya said nothing more, but the silence itself was an acknowledgement that truth had finally begun to emerge, that the lies were no longer unbreakable. Regina's rage outside the treatment room. Regina paced, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum, her composure fraying at the edges. She had spent years perfecting her mask, but the sight of Ethan turning to Maya, the sound of him defending her, had struck like a dagger. She could feel control slipping, and for a woman like Regina, nothing was more terrifying. She poured herself into whispers, plotting, rehearsing excuses, planning how she might twist even this into a narrative that served her. But deep down she knew the tide had shifted. Ethan had seen too much. Clara had survived long enough to still speak if given the chance. And Maya had returned not as a servant but as a savior. For the first time, Regina felt the cold edge of fear. The fall of Regina, the sterile stillness of Charleston General Hospital wrapped around the Calloways like a suffocating shroud. Clara Calloway lay resting, her frail body propped up by pillows, her breathing steadier but her face pale with exhaustion. The machines by her bedside beeped rhythmically, a reminder of how fragile her life had become. Ethan sat near the foot of the bed, shoulders bowed, the weight of his guilt pressing hard against his chest. He had spent hours replaying the past months in his mind, the moments he had dismissed his mother's subtle warnings, the times he had ignored Maya's kindness in favor of Regina's performance, the blindness he had chosen because it was easier than facing the truth. When Clara stirred, her thin fingers twitching against the blanket, Ethan leaned forward. "Mother," he whispered softly, his storm-gray eyes searching hers with desperation. "Don't strain yourself. You're safe now." Her lips parted, weak but determined. "Ethan, listen to me." Each word was a battle, her voice cracked yet resolute. "You must open your eyes, Regina is not what she pretends to be." The words cut like glass. Ethan froze, his throat tightening. It was one thing to suspect, to doubt in silence. But to hear his mother speak it aloud, fragile though she was, stripped away any remaining comfort and denial. Regina, who had been standing at the foot of the bed with her arms crossed tightly against her silk blouse, forced a brittle smile. "Clara, please. You're exhausted. Don't let the medication confuse you." But Clara's gaze was steady, piercing through the fog of age and illness. "No," she said firmly, her voice trembling but unyielding. "I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Maya protected me. Regina hurt me." The room fell into a silence so heavy it seemed the machines themselves paused. Ethan's jaw clenched, his hand curling into a fist against the arm of his chair. He turned slowly toward Regina, his eyes cold, sharp as steel. "Is it true?" His voice was low, dangerous in its calm. "Did you lay a hand on her?" Regina's composure wavered for the briefest second before she forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. "Of course not. How could you even ask me that? Your mother is confused, Ethan. She's old, fragile. You can't let her delusions destroy everything we've built." But Ethan wasn't convinced. Not anymore. His mother's words had broken something open inside him. and suddenly the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The bruises he had brushed off, the tremors in Clara's hands, the way her eyes had followed Maya with trust, the way they had darted away from Regina in fear. The truth had been there all along, and he had chosen not to see it. Maya, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward now. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of truth that needed no embellishment. "I don't need you to believe me, Mr. Calloway, but believe your mother. She has no reason to lie." She turned to Clara, her eyes softening. "She deserves peace, not fear." Ethan's chest rose and fell heavily as he looked between the two women, the one who had stood silently by his mother's side, defending her without recognition, and the other who had wrapped herself in lies and luxury, whose mask was cracking under the light of truth, Regina. Sensing control slipping like sand through her fingers, lashed out. Her voice rose, shrill and venomous. "This is absurd. You're going to take the word of a servant over me, over your fiancé? Ethan, think. What will people say? What will it do to your reputation if you throw me aside for— Enough." Ethan's voice thundered through the room, final and commanding. The storm that had been building inside him finally broke. "I don't care what people say. I care about the truth. And the truth is, I have been blind." He stood now, towering over Regina, his presence no longer that of a man chained by appearances, but of one awakening to his own conscience. "You hurt my mother. You tried to destroy the only person who truly protected her, and you thought your lies would shield you forever." Regina's mask shattered. Her eyes flared with a mix of desperation and rage. "You think you can just throw me away? After everything I've done for you? After everything I've sacrificed?" Ethan's lips curved into a bitter smile. "What you've done for me? You mean the lies, the cruelty, the poison you've poured into this house? That's not sacrifice, Regina. That's selfishness, and I won't be bound by it anymore." He stepped closer, his voice low but searing. "We're finished." The words struck like a hammer. Regina staggered back, her breath hitching as though he had physically struck her. For a woman who thrived on control, the sudden collapse of it left her reeling. She opened her mouth to retort, to claw her way back into power, but the look in Ethan's eyes silenced her. For the first time, she saw a man who would no longer bend to her will. Clara's lips curved into the faintest smile, relief washing over her pale features. She reached weakly for Maya's hand, her whisper barely audible but filled with gratitude. "Thank you, my dear." Maya squeezed her hand gently, her heart heavy but steady. She had not sought recognition, had not fought for anything but what was right. Yet in that moment, with Clara's hand in hers and Ethan's gaze finally clear, she felt the weight of justice begin to settle. Regina's fall was not yet complete. Society, gossip, and scandal would all play their part in the days to come. But within that hospital room, her empire of lies had crumbled. Ethan had chosen truth over appearances, his mother's safety over a gilded engagement, dignity over deceit. And for the first time in many long months, the Calloway estate seemed poised for something it had not known in years, the beginning of healing, redemption and renewal. The morning sun crept slowly over Charleston, gilding the city in light that seemed almost symbolic after the storm that had torn through the Calloway family. At the hospital, Clara Calloway rested peacefully, her body fragile but her spirit lighter than it had been in months. For the first time, the shadows that had haunted her in silence had been forced into the open, and she no longer felt the weight of fear pressing against her chest. Her son had finally seen the truth. Her heart, though weak, felt steadier with Maya sitting nearby, a quiet presence whose kindness had been her shield when no one else had dared to stand in the way. Ethan Calloway stood at the window of the hospital room, his reflection pale in the glass. He had spent his life cultivating an image of strength, composure, and control, yet he had discovered how easily lies could unravel a man who chose appearances over substance. The guilt still weighed heavily, his failure to protect his mother, his dismissal of Maya, his blindness to Regina's cruelty. But within the guilt, there was also determination. He had been given a second chance, and he would not waste it. The scandal had already begun to ripple through society. Word spread quickly when a Calloway broke an engagement, and when whispers of abuse and betrayal seeped into the gossip columns, Regina Ward's carefully constructed reputation began to fracture. She attempted to salvage it, granting interviews where she posed as the victim. But the more she spoke, the more inconsistencies surfaced. Former acquaintances came forward with stories of her manipulations, her callousness, her insatiable hunger for control. What had once been masked as charm was now unmasked as cruelty, and society, ever fickle, turned its back. Invitations stopped arriving. Investors withdrew from her ventures, and her name became more cautionary tale than golden ticket. The woman who had once entered ballrooms with heads turning now found doors closing before her very face. Yet for Maya, life began to blossom in a direction she had thought lost to her forever. After Clara's recovery stabilized, the hospital director approached her one afternoon. He had seen the way she worked during the emergency, the calm assurance in her voice, the precision of her movements. "You were trained once, weren't you?" he asked, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Not fully licensed, but you've studied nursing." Maya hesitated, the memories of her abandoned dream rising like ghosts. "I had to stop school. My mother was sick. I couldn't afford to finish." The director nodded slowly, then offered a faint smile. "You've got instincts money can't buy. If you want another chance, I know a scholarship program that would take you. You'd need references, and from what I've seen, you already have one very important one." He glanced toward Clara's room. Tears pricked Maya's eyes as she absorbed his words. A door that had long been bolted shut was creaking open again. For years she had carried the grief of a dream denied, convincing herself survival mattered more than aspiration. Now, for the first time, she felt the possibility of both. Clara insisted on writing the first letter of recommendation herself. Her trembling hand moved slowly across the paper, but her words were clear and resolute. "Maya Williams is a woman of courage, integrity, and skill. She is the reason I am alive today, and she is the reason I still believe goodness exists in this world." When Ethan read the letter, his throat tightened with emotion. He had not only wronged Maya, he had underestimated her entirely. He sought her out in the hospital garden one afternoon, where she sat quietly beneath an oak tree, the sun warming her face as she held her small notebook on her lap. "Maya," he began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of humility. She turned toward him, her expression calm, unreadable. He took a slow breath. "I've spent my life surrounded by power, wealth, and people who only told me what I wanted to hear. And when it mattered most, I believed a lie instead of listening to the one person who was speaking the truth. I can't undo what I did to you, but I can tell you this. I see you now. For who you are, and I am sorry." Maya studied him for a long moment. The apology was genuine, his eyes stripped of arrogance, his voice threaded with sincerity. Yet she was not a woman to be easily swayed by words alone. "It's not about me, Mr. Calloway," she said softly. "It's about your mother. She needed someone, and you chose not to see her pain. That's what hurt the most. But if you truly see now, then prove it, not to me, but to her." Her words struck him with the force of truth. He nodded slowly, understanding at last that redemption was not granted by a single apology, but earned through action, through consistency, through humility. As the weeks passed, Ethan did just that. He dedicated himself to his mother's recovery, ensuring she received the best care, but more importantly, spending time with her in ways he had long neglected. He read to her in the evenings, accompanied her on slow walks through the garden, listened to her stories without impatience. And each time he saw Maya at the hospital, assisting with quiet dignity, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. In time, Maya's scholarship was approved. On the morning she received the letter of acceptance, she sat in her small motel room with tears streaming freely down her cheeks, clutching the envelope to her chest. It was not just an opportunity. It was the vindication of years of struggle, the affirmation that resilience had not been in vain. She would finish what she had started. She would heal not just hearts but bodies, reclaiming the dream her mother had once nurtured. On the day she began her first official class, Clara insisted on being there, her arm looped through Ethan's as they accompanied Maya to the campus gates. The old woman's eyes gleamed with pride, her voice soft but strong. "Go on, child. Show them what you're made of." Ethan lingered behind as Maya walked forward, her steps steady, her head held high. He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that she had changed him, that her strength had awakened something in him he had not known was dormant. But he also knew Maya's journey was her own. She was not to be claimed, not to be defined by anyone's wealth or title. She was rising on her own terms. As she disappeared into the building, the morning light catching in her hair, Ethan whispered to himself, almost like a vow, Never again will I doubt the truth in front of me. For Maya, the world that had once cast her out now beckoned her forward. She carried with her the scars of injustice, the weight of betrayal, but also the fierce pride of survival. She had been dismissed as invisible, degraded as unworthy, silenced as powerless. Yet she had risen, not through revenge or bitterness, but through courage, resilience, and the unshakable belief that doing right was never wasted, even when no one seemed to see it. Regina faded into obscurity. Her name a caution whispered in drawing rooms, but never spoken aloud at the gatherings she once commanded. Clara lived out her days with dignity restored, her trust in humanity rekindled. Ethan became a man humbled and remade, learning at last that true power lay not in wealth or appearances, but in the courage to face the truth. And Maya stepped into her destiny, no longer the maid cast aside in the rain, but the woman who had stood unshaken, who had turned pain into strength, who had transformed injustice into triumph. Her story, whispered in the hospital halls, repeated in the Calloway estate, and carried in the hearts of those she touched, became more than survival. It became a testament that even when the world turns against you, even when lies drown out your voice, the truth, like light at dawn, will always return.